Hi, I'm William Spaniel. Let's learn about international relations. Today's topic is the capitalist peace theory. So in this lecture, we're interested in asking the question, how does capitalism or trade cause peace? Now, the capitalist peace theory is very simple. It looks like this. It says that countries that trade a lot with each other tend not to fight wars against each other. So we've seen similar statements in the past where originally we were talking about how two democracies tend not to fight wars with each other. And in the last video, we were talking about two countries with McDonald's tend not to fight wars against one another. And we've just simply replaced democracy and McDonald's here with trade. So countries that trade a lot with one another, that are engaging in a lot of trade between those two countries, are not going to be fighting wars as frequently as two countries that don't trade at all with one another. So it's a very simple theory. And we know that this is statistically true, but of course that correlation does not imply causation thing pops up again, where we know from a couple of videos ago that just because we see a statistical relationship between capitalism and peace, we don't actually know that capitalism causes peace. And in fact, it could go the other way around, where peace causes trade, where because we know that we like each other and we don't want to fight wars with each other, that actually encourages us to trade with each other. And so that's why we're actually seeing peace between those two countries, is not because of the trade, but rather the peace is causing the trade. And while that might be true to some extent, we are still interested in knowing whether there can be some sort of theoretical mechanism that causes trade to actually cause peace. So maybe it does go both ways, but can we at least show that there's some effect going from capitalism to peace? In other words, that capitalism at least causes some of the peace. Maybe it does go both ways, but can we show that capitalism is at least partially responsible here for peace? And the answer is that we can. And in fact, based off of what we've done in the last two units, where last unit we talked about trade, 2 units ago we talked about bargaining over conflict, if you've seen that stuff before and you understood it, this argument is going to be very straightforward and you're going to get it really, really easily. So let's try to do that right now. In the last unit, we talked about how trade causes a surplus. So this is the idea that if we specialize in what we're good at producing, we can produce more stuff and then trade with one another. And this creates a surplus of goods, extra goods that wouldn't exist if we were just producing goods by ourselves. And if we split that surplus, that's going to make everyone better off than if we did not trade at all with one another. So in other words, trade is really good and it helps both of us. Okay? So that was last unit. 2 units ago, we talked about how peaceful bargains are easier to reach when war is costlier. Right? That was the whole idea of the bargaining range. And so all we have to do is really combine these two facts together and we'll learn something new here. We'll learn the capitalist peace. So what's going on? Well, states can't trade with each other when they're at war. When we're busy shooting at each other, we're not trading with each other. And that's bad because if we were getting a surplus before from trade, that means by fighting one another, we're missing out on that surplus. So the trade surplus actually makes war costlier in some sense. So let's see what this looks like in terms of those bargaining ranges that we looked at before. Remember, this is the geometric bargaining model that we talked about in that unit on bargaining and war. And so what we see here is a division of some good, could be a strip of territory between two countries. And if we were to fight a war, then country A is going to receive PA of the good in expectation. That's the amount from here all the way to over here. So that's the amount that A would get from war if it were to fight, minus, or forgetting about any cost for the moment, and B gets the remainder, or this amount over here. So that's how much it expects to earn of the good if it fights. But then after we factor in those costs, we see A's costs of war are this value between here and here, and B's costs are this value between here and here. And so after we consider how much war is going to cost us as countries A and countries B and A, then we see that there's a bargaining range that exists so that any peaceful division between PA minus CA and PA plus CB, that's going to be mutually preferable to war. We're going to want to settle anywhere in here, and this will be better for both of us than if we fought a war. But this is without trade. So what happens when we add trade to this equation? Well, let's take a look at that. So we're going to make this value TA, A's share of the trade surplus, and this value TB, B's share of the surplus. So that's that amount right here. We're adding TB here and we're subtracting TA here. So what that means is that in expectation, A is still receiving this amount if it fights a war of the good that is trying to be divided, and B is still receiving this amount if they fought a war and they're trying to divide that amount of good. And so that's how much B is getting. This is how much A is getting. Now, A is going to pay this amount of costs, just like before. That's the military costs, like destroy buildings, dead soldiers, that sort of thing. And this is going to be B's military costs, just like before. But now, when the states are fighting one another, they're not trading with one another. And so A is missing out on this much of the surplus if it fights, and B is missing out on this much of the surplus if it fights. And so, given the fact that there's this existence of a trade surplus between these two countries, this increases the size of the bargaining range. So now A and B are mutually preferring a peaceful outcome that is in this range, anywhere from PA minus CA minus TA to PA plus CB plus TB. That's going to be mutually preferable to war. And so if we just compare these two outcomes, or these two bargaining ranges, we see that the bargaining range without trade is going to be smaller than the bargaining range with trade. And that's just because the surplus is greater, or the surplus actually exists when there is trade, as opposed to there being no surplus without trade. So to explain the piece, it's really straightforward here. Trade makes war less appealing. If we fight, we lose out on the surplus. So we don't want to fight as much because we like that surplus. We're both enjoying that surplus. And we know from 2 units ago that the less appealing war is, essentially the costlier war is, the less likely information problems or shifting power will lead to fighting. So that's the idea behind the capitalist piece. That's why we think trade causes peace. And that wraps up this video. And in the next video, we'll apply this lesson to talking about the rivalry between the United States and China. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time. Take care.